I was telling a couple of other people kind of my plan to as far as how I'm going to do this discussion or presentation, if you want to call it that. It's really going to be a discussion, and that's really the way I'm going to drive it. What I wanted to do is kind of go through the kind of past, present, future of technology and quizzing. And when we get to the future part, that's what we'll be doing the discussion part, right? It's trying to get some feedback on where we think quizzing should be, where it could be, what ideas we might think would be cool, things of that nature. But before we get started, I just want to kind of introduce myself. I know a lot of you at least know who I am by name. Some of you may not know who I am and why I'm doing this. My family moved to Kansas City from Wisconsin, so I am a Wisconsin person. I'm a proud Packers fan. But we moved to Kansas City in 1986. I started quizzing locally with Kansas City Youth for Christ that year. Did not go to nationals in 87 just because I didn't realize it was such a big deal. In 88, went to nationals as a freshman in high school, and went the remaining 3 years after that, so 4 years at nationals. And then started coaching right after that. Coached literally our top team the year after I graduated, which is pretty absurd when you think about it. But did that for a number of years, got quiz mastering. For me, I've always been a technology person, so even back in those days, I was doing some small things for quizzing, locally primarily. And I wrote a scorekeeping program way back then that we used, and it wasn't really designed to be used in a quiz. It was really designed to keep track of your stats, to be able to take them from paper, get them in the computer, and allow you to create your reports or whatever off of it without having to manually take care of all that stuff. As time went on, I started doing more and more stuff, and so if you look around all the software that's out there, if it wasn't written by me, it was probably copied off of something that I did before. So that one's mine. The iPad app is mine. The Epic Battle, if your quizzers are using that was me. And most of those things, honestly, a lot of those come out of me having a need for it, and after I've used it and had my need met, then I give it out to other people because they can use it as well. So clearly I'm passionate about it. I've been doing it 30 plus years. So I'm a software developer by trade. So obviously doing this on my free time. All my software is free. I think there's a couple of apps in the App Store that are not free, and the reason they're not free isn't because I want to make money off of them. It's because if you make things free and they're easily, like on the phone especially, you get a lot of people asking questions about them, and they don't really even understand what they're doing with it. Like, there are people that'll download it around the world, and they have no reason to download a scorekeeping app for Bible quizzing because it doesn't really serve them any purpose. So anyways, usually that's why they're not free. Does cover a little bit of my cost there, but that's really not why I do it. So anyway, that's a little bit about me. I just want to, again, like I said, I'm going to just kind of go through. I decided to kind of think of it in terms of all the different parts of quizzing. And so if you think about who's involved in a quiz, there's, we've got 3 table officials. We've got a quiz master, we've got a scorekeeper, we've got a timekeeper. Obviously the quizzers, you can't quiz without them. We've got coaches, and we've got spectators, right? And so I thought, okay, how do we think about this in terms of all the different people who are involved in quizzing? And so literally just going to go down the list and talk about what we have for each of those, and what we've done in the past, and then some ideas for the future. So just starting with Quizmaster, you guys remember how many of you guys have been around since before the computer world of quizzing? Okay, so you remember the big red boxes. So obviously there's stuff that predates that, but stuff before that, that's before my years. I was in the era of the wooden boxes before the plastic ones that we've had more recently, but nonetheless, those red boxes served us well for quite a long time. That group that created those, they did it as a ministry for quite a long time, and they're still working today, right? We have places all over the place using them for practices. I know that a lot of them have been sent overseas to various missions groups and stuff where we haven't needed them anymore. So those are obviously fantastic. The other thing that was a little different back then is Quizmaster's questions were printed on a piece of paper, and the Quizmaster read it off the paper and rolled it or folded it or whatever, right? And nowadays that's a little different. So where we are today, obviously this is where we are primarily. We've got a program here that hooks the computer up to the seats and we can tell what's going on here. The reasons why we did that is probably more important than what it is, right? I mean, what it is pretty clear, it's pretty obvious. The biggest, this was actually something that I had wanted to do for a long time. I'm not a hardware guy at all. I'm purely a software guy. But when I finally came across somebody who had done the hardware, I was able to get the software written for it. It really came down to one major thing, and that is when you think of a quiz, the rules state that a Quizmaster is supposed to stop as soon as they can, right? And that was if you were working with those red boxes, those lights, especially when the batteries were low or the room was bright, as soon as you can, quite often was quite a bit after the quizzer was already standing. And I know for me as a coach, and certainly as a quizzer, it was always a little bit of a frustration when somebody jumped really early and got a whole bunch of extra words. And I'm like, wait a minute, if you're following the rules, they shouldn't have had that opportunity. So it was really more of a fairness thing. So a lot of the technology that went into this and the design of it was really around getting the Quizmaster's attention, making sure that the Quizmaster knew as quickly as possible that the quizzer had jumped. Obviously, getting the verse on the screen there was something that helped a lot from a speed of the quiz perspective. Every time there was a challenge or even just a question from the Quizmaster's perspective, when the quizzer said something that wasn't on the piece of paper in front of them, it was timeout, get the book, look it up, read it, yep, that was there, right? And taking notes to see if, they said a whole lot of words, trying to write as fast as you could. All those things led to quizzes being a lot slower. If you look at the quiz times today, even today where, lots of overtimes and all that stuff, we finished, 5-10 minutes after the scheduled time. Back in, 10, 15 years ago, you'd be lucky if you finished an hour before it was supposed to be done. Okay? So that was a lot of the reasoning why some of these features were added. There's some things in here that people probably don't realize are there. One of them that honestly, I'd forgotten that I put in there until Wednesday night. If you go into one of the settings options, you can actually download the list of teams if you're connected to the internet. Really helpful, keeps you from having to type them all in. Little thing, it's not a huge thing, but it kind of helps a little bit. You can obviously, if you have different rules or practice scenarios or whatever, when you don't have 3 teams of 5, you can set that up to be anywhere up to 20 seats. These controllers handle up to 20 seats. You can arrange that however many teams, however many quizzers you want to, with any combination that gets you up to 20. So that's something that's kind of useful. Obviously there's some different settings. You can change colors and whatever, blah, 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 blah. Those aren't used all that often, but they can be. Formatting of the question, there are people who can't see as well, you can make it bigger. Just little things like that hopefully help out. So that's kind of where that is today. See if there's anything else the other big thing that was added a few years ago was the built-in randomizer. So obviously it had the questions in it, but the built-in randomizer, there's 2 real big reasons for that. One is simplicity. It makes it a lot easier to just even put together a quiz meet. But the other thing is, quite often, there's kind of 2 issues that you'd run into when everyone was on the exact same question set. One was, you're in a quiz here, and there's a quiz right here, and let's be honest, those walls, you can hear through them. And they'd ask a question here, and they're 2-3 questions ahead, and this quiz, all of a sudden they hear the same question, and they know the answer beforehand. So obviously we want to hear that. The other thing that happened on occasion, somebody would read the wrong one. One way or another, back when it was on paper, even on the computer, they'd pull up the wrong question set, and lo and behold, somebody would get the next quiz, and they'd hear the same questions they just had in the last quiz. And so having the built-in randomizer took care of that. It's on the fly. We don't have to worry about ever being anybody finding out what was going to be asked. So that was the big one there. So, future. Some things that I could see happening, and this is where I kind of like to get some feedback from some of you guys. One of them that I've actually kind of wanted to do for quite some time is have some integration between these two things. So not only do you know here who's up, but when they jump, this one's already pops that up, and so I don't have to select the quizzer. It knows what they are. When there's a sub, that stuff happens if somebody's taken out of the seat, either here or there, that light's turned off, or they're taken out of this quiz over here, which all those things, there's a lot of things that can be done that would integrate these two that would just kind of make that stuff a little bit smoother. Whether or not some of that's worth doing depends on, how difficult it is to do it, obviously. One thing that was talked about a few years ago, actually, in a meeting much like the one that's going on over in the other one, in the other room, is the idea of remote quizzing. And really what that is having some way to hook one of these computers up here and have another computer in a completely different location and have some way of getting that information together. And obviously you need some sort of video or some sort of communication as well. But some way of making that happen so that groups, it was really talked about in terms of there are groups that are really small and don't really have a way to get some growth going. And so if they could have some quizzes against some other teams, maybe that would help them and give them an opportunity to do that. Along with that, one of the ideas that I had was that especially in today's world of Alexa and Siri and all these other things is, well, what if the quizmaster, in a practice scenario at least, could actually be the computer from a speaking perspective? Not necessarily from an answering perspective. I think we're a ways off there. Alexa and all those things have come a long ways. They understand a lot of what we do, but not quite good enough to cover what we would need in a quiz. But if you think about when you do remote, one of the challenges is that delay, right? You got people hearing things at different speeds. And so when you do it via computer, then the delay, we can actually kind of take some of that out of it. We can actually calculate it because we know where it is in the speaking cadence, and we can create some interesting possibilities there. It also gives you the possibility of, what if you don't have a quizmaster? What if you just want to practice at home and you don't have somebody to ask you the questions? All kinds of things you could do there, from change the speed and cadence of the quizmaster, change how consistent the quizmaster is, give you opportunities to practice things that you couldn't practice today, at least not at home. So those are some of the ideas that I have for this. What are some of your thoughts? What are some things that you, as especially those who've used it, things that you'd like to see in it, and maybe some things that you thought maybe we should have?
I haven't used yours, used Perfect Quiz Out.
Mm-hmm.
They allow you to pick by verse. Does yours randomizer let you pick by verse?
It does. So right now, ultimately the randomizer that's built into it does allow you to pick by verse, but the UI, the thing that actually presents the selection for you does not. So it's something that could be done without a whole lot of work. So yeah, it's definitely something to consider.
That'd be helpful for us, because sometimes we want to hold down the questions and we don't have the internet.
Sure. Yeah, and it certainly is something that's useful in a practice scenario, especially, right? Where, I don't know how you guys do your quizzes throughout the year. And at Summit, it's been typically, it's still full chapters, and we add stuff on throughout the year. But definitely in practice situations, certainly a lot of times where partials would be helpful. Go ahead.
So we do junior quizzing, and we have like 20 verses at a shot.
Sure.
So that would be really useful to us, because then we could use computer for it too.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely something we can look into adding. Do you have something? Same thing. So those are great ideas. And again, from a technology perspective, it's definitely doable. So we can certainly look at those. Any other ideas? Yes.
Since we're talking about junior quizzing, we have kind of a funny way of doing junior quizzing. We have several different sets of material, so that when our junior quizzers graduate from junior quizzing, the previous year that they had done the material for this year, so that they've already got a chapter or two under their belt before they start quizzing as a team. So anyways, we have like several age groups that are quizzing together, and so that changes our randomization algorithm, which that would make it, that's more complicated than I think some of the other things
Sure.
Comment on.
So it's talking about a situation where they're quizzing over really very different sets of data of questions and how that would work. We should talk a little bit because there's probably some things that are actually built in again to the core of this randomizer.
Okay.
It's not exposed to you, but we can definitely probably find.
Okay,
some
I know
things.
Gabriella has talked to you.
Yeah, I think she has a while
We can
back.
talk back and go over the details.
Yep, absolutely.
And we use different bonuses in our league at home.
Yeah, so we'll talk about that a little bit when we get to the scorekeeping, but definitely remind me on that because there's some features in there that a lot of people don't realize, at least in this version. Yeah.
Has there been any discussion about, like on the iPad version, you can see all the questions for that verse? To put that on the, for the quiz master?
Yeah, so the question is, the coaches all have the questions in front of them, right? Pretty much every one of them is using some kind of scoring, and even back before we had the iPads and whatnot, people had books of the questions, right? So they've got them all in front of them. Why doesn't the Quizmaster have that? Well, the answer is actually they do. It's there. It's not displayed. However, I am a huge opponent to this idea. And we were talking about that a little bit before. The reason why is, for me, that tends to put the focus on the questions. So from a Quizmaster and a judgment perspective, I am judging not whether or not I feel they gave me a valid question and answer based on what I think is in front of me. Instead, I'm making a decision based on what the question set is. And so then what ends up happening is the quizzers end up focusing on studying and memorizing questions instead of studying and memorizing God's Word. And the moment we tip that scale, we're done, right? That's not what we're here for. So I don't like it here. It is there because it was asked for, but that's my reason for not being an opponent of that.
That would be something that would change at the BQF meeting level.
Yes, correct.
And it comes up most every year.
Yeah.
But I agree. I'm glad that it doesn't happen. It's nice having them on because I dipped into those a lot during practice.
I was going to say, it's useful at practice. It's really useful at practice. And I'll give you guys kind of a little coaching tip from a practice perspective that I do sometimes. There's a lot of times when you're practicing, whether or not they pick the correct question that's in front of you is really not the most important thing, right? It's whether or not they can form a valid question from the verse, right? So a lot of times, if I said what, and they gave me a completely different what question, I'll go look at the question and be like, yeah, that's one of them, good enough, right? Because whether or not they statistically pick the right one of three what questions, I don't really care. That matters in a quiz. That matters for me as a coach when I'm trying to determine how fast you should go. But when you're trying to figure out whether or not you're able to quiz correctly, just as a coaching idea, sometimes that's actually a very useful feature. Any other ideas on Quizmaster? Yeah.
For practice, if you could somehow make it so you have another computer there where they could see their lights, so they all stay down and turn their lights off. And,
So that's interesting.
I think that they're probably just looking at them and just
Yeah.
they want to check them.
well, some people do that for a
So
while.
there's a couple things there. So the question was around, or the comment was around having the ability, at least in practice, for the quizzers to be able to see their lights. There's some true benefits to that in a number of ways. It helps them learn their jumping, getting a feel for when their light is on and off, and it can actually help them in a quiz to not have the light on all the time because they're a little bit more aware of it. I will say that if you're using it, if you were to do that during an actual quiz, you're probably going to see a lot of people just waiting, getting their light on, getting it off, and then they're perfectly set, and they're not really learning where they're at because they're able. If you're able to do that real time in a quiz, I'll tell you from personal experience. I liked always to sit in seat 1 and seat 5 because from those seats, quite often with the red boxes, I could see my light. And I knew exactly when it was off. Now, when they had the guards up, obviously that wasn't the case, but it was quite often where quizzers took advantage of that. And in a quiz, in a practice, is there value to that? Possibly. Could it be done? I think the easiest way to do that would be to have a second screen hooked up to your computer, and it becomes a cost factor. Certainly could be doable though.
As a practice,
Yeah,
there's probably one in the closet in your shirt.
very well might be. Yeah,
The
absolutely.
problem there then is getting
The synchronization of reports. Yeah.
Seats.
You, from a technology perspective, something would have to be done, but absolutely it could be. Yeah.
I do a demonstration quiz for our local
Uh-huh.
group where I put the screen behind them.
Uh-huh.
so the quizzers can't see it, but
Right.
that allows the
Yeah.
audience to see the question and
Yep.
what the quiz master's looking
Yeah,
for.
that's a really good idea.
They really like, I mean, for spectators, that makes it much more interesting.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good idea. I hadn't thought of it. Did you have something else?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, and this is off of this topic, and we don't have to go here, but I just, in light of quiz mastering and trying to give us as much resources as possible to stop as quickly as the light comes on, and this would have to go through the rules committee. Is there technology where, I don't know what you would do, light comes on, screen blacks out for just a split second or something, to help us
So-
stop, or anything other?
I've actually, that was the original design. It doesn't actually work very well.
Okay.
There's a couple reasons. One, it becomes actually a huge distraction in the kind of the flickering light scenarios when people are getting set and
Okay.
it becomes really difficult to look at. It actually hurts your eyes. But more importantly than that, it actually doesn't help you stop very much faster. It helps you if you stop, if you read 2 or 3 words after, but when you read, you're always reading at least 1 word ahead of what you're speaking, so you're already 1 word out anyways.
So just as a follow-up, is there anything you can think of technologically that could help us stop quicker?
Shock therapy.
Yeah, in all honesty,
I-
I've put so much into trying to make that happen. I think that there's just a degree of some people just need to be willing to stop. I think it's more of a, no, that's the way I do it. I keep my pace at this pace and that's the way I read it.
It's very frustrating for the kids.
It is.
Yeah.
Very
If you're gonna use
frustrating.
Alexa in the future, you can have it stop right when it's
You absolutely can, and from a quizzing, the question is whether or not you know, and obviously that's a BQF level thing if the technology was there. The question is, do you want to do that, right? And obviously that's a possibility. Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Part of the joy of quizzing, I think, is the different, having to deal
Yeah.
with the different
Yes.
quiz masters.
Absolutely.
Right.
I totally agree, and I'll tell you, if I were to do something like an Alexa thing, I would have like different settings of, you know, styles.
Give
so
a
that
word.
You could, yeah, I mean, honestly, if you're practicing,
Give 5
you
words.
need to have that, right?
Some of us need that.
All right, so we're moving. I'm going to move on to the next one just because I don't want to run out of time. So scorekeeping is you know, the next big one, and obviously from a past perspective, we did it on paper for quite a long time. I don't know how many of you guys have been around long enough. If you were around previous to 2003, where at Friday night you'd probably quite often be waiting until midnight to find out where your teams were the next morning. In 2003, when we first used the scorekeeping. My scorekeeping app, we actually only had it live in a few sites, but I had the stats done before I went to supper. So that was really the driver for this change here. Obviously, technology from that perspective, it's largely the accuracy of the scoring. You don't have to worry about calculating it. There's a lot of things there that make it a lot easier. Moving quizzers around instead of having to cross them out and hopefully keep track of which person's in the right seat. This helped with a lot of those things, but some things that I see in the future there, or actually even some, let me go back a little bit to now, and it's kind of a combination from a spectator perspective, but the real-time updates that we were able to have on websites. So you know, whether it was Duncan's program or my program, there's a lot of things you can do to make it available on a website. We're at about like a 10-second delay here between when something happens in a quiz and it's available for anyone in the world to look at. So that's one of the kind of the cool things that something like this provides that you would never get with a paper score. From a future perspective, I talked a little bit about integration with the Quizmaster. Tablet as an option for actually keeping score, so using the iPad or something like that as actual, instead of having a device like this, you could actually keep score on your iPad. And interestingly, the new version of the technology that they have for that is based on a lot of this, so it's not that far away. But having that as an option, and that's really more of a, you know, from a purchasing perspective, do I want to buy this or do I want to buy that? You know, it's just to give you options.
Does it have to be Apple?
I mean, that's part of the discussion, right? And I'll definitely talk about that a little bit on the scorekeeping, or on the coaching side of it. But the answer to your question is, does it have to be no? But that's where I'm going to talk a little bit about getting more people involved. The other thing that I'd like to see from a technology perspective on scorekeeping is the ability to have data going to the coaches and from the coaches so that the coaches don't have to ask for a score check, so that they can see, hey, my score says this and your score says that, something's wrong. I need to figure out what's wrong now, and vice versa, so that somehow the scorekeeper can know, hey, I got three coaches that say this person has 2 correct, and I say they have 1 correct. What's wrong, right? So just some things that could be done there to kind of help smooth out some of that stuff. That's one of those where it's a nice idea. How often does it happen? Depends, if it doesn't happen very often, it's not worth it. So, I think those are the big things I've got on that. Some other integration things I'll talk about when I get to the timekeeper. But any other ideas on the scorekeeping? And again, keep in mind right now, I'm talking about scorekeeping as the scorekeeper, not as the coaches. Thoughts, ideas? Yeah.
How hard is it to hook up the network?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about that. So this particular one is actually super easy. It's after many iterations of it. Literally, it uses something, either a Dropbox or a OneDrive or any of those syncing file technologies that you probably are already using. That's what it uses. So if it can get to the internet, you're good. Even if you don't have internet access, you can run it completely on a computer and go home and hook it to the internet, and it'll be good. If you only need one site, then one computer, you're just go and you're done. But the moment you want to start having 2 or 3 sites or more hooked together, all they need is internet access to be completely live. If you want to just keep your stats and eventually bring it together at the end of the day, they just need internet access at one point in time, sync the data up, and shut it off. So if you have a situation where you don't have internet access, but maybe back at your home you can do all your quizzing throughout, get all the computers ready, take it to your quiz sites, do all your quizzing, take it home, get it online, sync it up, and you're done. And it has all the data on it, and all the syncing will happen when you get it online. Yeah.
Can you dump it to like a USB storage to do it, Robert? Because we go to some places where there's not even good Wi-Fi.
Sure.
I mean, we have our regionals as 3 sites.
Yeah.
So it's easy to set up a Wi-Fi access point. Just for this.
In some respects, yes. I'd have to play with it a little bit to. Supposed to kind of reiterate some of these questions. The question was really around whether can you dump it to something like a USB drive or something like that to kind of sync it up. The answer is sort of yes. Ultimately, they're just files in a folder. The only problem that you may run into is the syncing frameworks may not be sure which one is the right file in that case. So I'd have to play with that a little bit to see what that would do. But yeah, probably.
I don't know if I'm extending what you just said or not, but I thought, when I heard the question, I was thinking along the lines of like a Wi-Fi router with a USB port on it, so a NAS type of scenario. That's the thing, as I listen to you, that's the thing I kind of like not being on the internet in my quizzing environment.
So, and that's fine, right? I think that the key to the way this works is it doesn't have to be online during your quizzing.
Yep.
It just has to be online at some point in time to eventually get the data into the central location. The problem with using like an external, if you've got a network, and actually what has been done even in the past year or over the last several years, is that networking will collapse on you at some point in time, and then all of a sudden your quiz sites are just broken until that network gets back up. This type of technology allows you to completely work independently, locally, keep running for. You never have to hook it up until you want that data someplace else. So there are some, you certainly can do there. If you wanted to do that, I think the solution is to go get a syncing tool that works on a local network. There are Dropbox type things that work on a local network as well that don't require you to have internet connection. So I would just look at a tool like that if that's what you want to do.
So say if you have like 3 sites,
Mhm.
which is what we do, and then what we've done is give awards for that day.
Mhm.
Can you be able to?
Yeah, so if you've got 3 different sites and at the end of the day you want to give the awards for that day, you really would have to have them get, at least at the end of the day, all 3 of the computers come together and get on the internet one time for, a minute or 2. And then you would have all the data in one place. So one of the potential downtime, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
But if they're on the internet all day,
Then it's going,
It's constantly
yeah, it's
updated.
constantly updating.
and all the computers have that information, then
Correct.
It's all syncing.
Yeah, so ultimately, yeah, if a computer, the other advantage to that is if a computer crashes and completely just dies, you just go grab another one and open that same quiz, and you may have lost a question. I guess at best that would be the most you would have lost. Probably not even that.
But does it compile
Huh?
does it compile the statistics from all 3 sites?
If they are all online, it will. They just have to be connected to the internet. Ultimately, all the computers have all the data all the time if they are online, with some degree of delay.
So you don't have to have a server anymore.
Correct. No server. Yep. Any other
Do you have
thoughts?
iPads?
Do I have iPads?
No. We'll do that if we support people on iPads.
If we got to where we supported this, then yes. The iPads right now don't do that, but if you know the kind of the vision of where I see that going, definitely, it would be the same technology ultimately under the. Any other thoughts on quiz scorekeeping? Before I hit the next one.
So do you have to, with that we use today, it's just a laptop
Mhm.
that we
From-
don't have to buy a special?
No.
Just download your program.
Yeah, and I can certainly get you specs and stuff for that, but yeah, it doesn't take much to run it at all. We can talk about that stuff a little bit offline, but yeah, definitely. Do you have something else?
Has there been any talk about being able to show a running clock to the quizzers the whole time it's going?
That'll be the next thing. So,
And then
so
also
let's use that as a transition. Running score is actually an interesting one. I think that's kind of a BQF level decision there. Ultimately, to do running score, you just have to have some display someplace where someone can see it. And from a technology perspective, there's actually some things already in here that will do some of that for you. But I was going to hit one other thing that somebody, and I think you said something about custom rules. This app has a lot of flexibility from a rules perspective. There's a settings screen where you can set your rules, and it has, honestly, there have only been a couple times where I'm like, oh, it doesn't do that. And one of them is the way we currently do our timeouts with regard to overtime. But largely, you know, if you have some time and you want to go around and play with it, there's a lot of options in there as far as how you configure your rules. So, and it does both personal quizzes and team quizzes. We do some kind of personal quizzing stuff in Kansas City. It's kind of tailored in this way. Yeah.
What is the name of that app?
It's called Scorekeeper 6, but if you go to proquizzer.com, that's where you can find all the stuff that I've done. It's the same place that all the website that we're hitting right now
I think
to
my
show
daughter
up.
tried to go to it and tried to download it onto my granddaughter's iPad mini, a mini iPad.
Uh-huh.
Now, she couldn't get it to work. And
The
for a reason.
this scorekeeping app won't work on it. You have to go to the App Store to get that.
The other, wow.
You'd have to go to the App Store to get something for the iPad.
Oh.
And it should be up there right now.
Actually, leads to my question.
Yeah.
So we're, overseas and always trying to adapt things. Is there any option in the future where you'd have the actual scorekeeper program that's mobile friendly, so that you could actually use your phone to keep the actual score, versus just using like a coach's
Yeah,
app?
yeah. So in terms of like using a mobile, or when you say mobile,
Using
you're
a mobile
talking
phone.
tablet or phone?
Or phone or tablet,
Yeah,
but something that would actually keep
I
all
think,
the stats.
Yeah, I think that's, again, that was kind of what I was driving towards as a different option for an input device.
Okay.
Eventually, absolutely. It's not there today, but
Sure.
certainly is a possibility. All right, let's go over to timekeeping, talk a little bit about that. So this guy here, you guys are pretty familiar with this guy, right? He's been around for a long time, since I've been quizzing, for sure. These guys, I don't know if you guys realize what these are actually for. They're for a dark room, interestingly. And they're not cheap. I think they run about $130, $150 new. You can find them used, sometimes cheaper than that. But the worst thing about them is, A, they're analog and they get kind of wonky and out of whack, but they don't integrate well with these. So from my perspective, I think the big things that I see there and kind of where we are today, this is what's used in most places. There are some apps out there. I've got one that's currently not in the App Store. We'll be taking care of that before too terribly long. There's some other people who have written some as well, I think, for Android. And don't ask me right now what that is, because I don't know. But there are some things out there. Both of these apps actually have a timekeeping built into them as well. So that's kind of where we are today. And actually, I've got some hardware that actually hooks into this one, but we'll talk about that another time. Where I see this going, for me, the biggest thing is whatever that input device is, A, it's got to be digital, and B, I want it integrated into this, the scorekeeping. And the reason I want it integrated into the scorekeeping is, what's the one thing that you can't see when you go online and look at a score, a quiz that's going on? How much time is left in the quiz? And I can't do that until that's here. So to me, that's the number one thing that I want to see from a timekeeping perspective, is some kind of digital way to get that time into this. And if I can do that, then that's one more piece of information we can show to people who can't actually be here. And that's a piece of information. I added one thing to the running score. I don't know if any of you guys have looked at the website, but I show a timestamp of when every time a thing happened. It's kind of helpful because you can kind of judge, okay, it's been about 3-4 minutes into the quiz, but it's nowhere near what you really want to know. I want to know how many questions are left in this quiz approximately. Did that just win the quiz for them? Or did they just lose the quiz because of that error? Or is there another minute left, right? And I can't do that until I've got that. So that's the big thing for me on the timekeeping. Any ideas on timekeeping besides that? Yeah.
Is there a way you can make it so that the timekeeper also has the question in front of him? So that he can be the number 2 assistant judge?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, from that perspective, a lot of those things are possible. I think the big barrier to a lot of those things is cost. At the moment you start adding more screens, more integration, you got to ask yourself, is that cost worth it? Sometimes maybe it is. I do encourage the timekeepers as much as possible to be looking over here. Running the clock, for the most part, especially with these ones, you get your finger in the right spot, and then you don't really need to, you wait till it gets touched, right? I don't need to be looking at it. So I really encourage timekeepers to be looking over here, and obviously that's not as easy as if it's right in front of you, but it's definitely something to think about.
Will you have a tone on the timer so that the person doesn't have to call the time? Because
Yeah,
sometimes
yeah.
that can vary.
Yeah, there's definitely so on the app that I've got, one of the things that's always frustrating with these is, especially at the end of the quiz, if a quizzer's answering and the clock has ended, I don't want the buzzer to go off, but I do want his clock buzzer to go off. So it does some things to keep things from buzzing at the wrong times and such. But yeah.
We've been using that in our phone, because we don't have any of those clocks left. On the
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
iPads, there's a really neat, and I thought wasn't there something in the minutes last year that we were gonna have?
I think, yeah. So the app that I have is one that I think if people are using. Somebody else wrote one, and again, it's not in the App Store right now, but it will be back. There's some things on that are good. There's a couple kind of cost things, but yeah, it is something that Summit was using a lot this year. Most of the quizzes were done that way. Every once in a while, somebody would use one of these, but definitely something that we're moving towards. Yeah.
Will you be making them Android?
Yeah, so again, I'll come back to that, but the answer is, in the case of the timekeeping one, there is an Android one written by somebody else, and I don't remember what that is.
On the
But,
multi-timer?
huh?
Like on the multi-timer
Yeah, I don't even know.
on Android, it's just to let you have the different, actual 4 or 5 different timers.
Uh-huh. Yeah, so there was somebody that wrote one for quizzing specifically though, from Summit. But. All right, so let me hit the next one. I think that the next one that I talk about is the coach. And so obviously the big things for a coaching, from a scorekeeping perspective, it was paper. From a quizzing material perspective, it was the book. It was sometimes a book of questions. Obviously that's come a ways in that almost, I don't know, I wouldn't say all, but the vast majority of the coaches are walking around with an iPad, and I really wish that I got like a percentage of the fee that Apple got off of that, because most of those were bought just for this. But anyway, make sure I'm not running out of time. So in all honesty, that stuff was written primarily just for me. I wrote it because I was coaching, and I didn't want to have to look all that stuff up. But eventually, I made it available to other people. Where I see that going, I think, obviously, I talked a little bit about the integration with the scorekeeping and be able to get the data to and from there. Where'd that go? The time sync as well. It'd be nice if the coaches had the time on their iPad, right? So that they didn't have to say, hey, how much time is left every 2 seconds at the end of the quiz, because they would have it, right?
One of the things that I miss not having on here is, when it was on paper pencils, have I taken my time out yet?
Yeah.
That would be another thing that I
Yeah,
would like
just
to have on.
keeping track of the timeouts on the app. I think I actually may have that in my new version already. Again, because the new version is actually based off of the same structure as this one, so it's probably there. But definitely. More. I have as one of the things on my kind of vision of more data. For me as a coach, I actually have all kinds of data that special versions of the app that I tend to make for myself that I'm playing around with, where I keep track of how many syllables were there when they answered that question, whether or not it was a knowledge error or a 50-50 type situation. I keep track of which question was asked for each question, and so I can go back and look at a lot more information and make judgments on, okay, you guys are jumping too fast because your average syllables are, whatever, and I know statistically that if you jump at that number of syllables, you got a 25% chance of getting it right. But if you add another half word even, or a full another syllable, now you're up to 60%. And that's going to win you quizzes, right? So, there's a lot of times as a coach, and especially as a quizzer, you get an error and you think, oh, I jumped too fast. Or, probably even worse, you get one right and you think I'm jumping at the right speed because I got that little bit of a word, right? But the reality is, you got lucky or you had misfortune. And so if you keep that pace, you're either going to lose because you got too many errors because you're jumping too fast, or you're going to lose that quiz because everyone else is going to beat you up because they're going to adjust to what the speed should be. And so having that data in front of you to actually know that stuff is enormously helpful as a coach. Again, I'm probably a little bit overboard on some of those things, but data like that, I think there's a lot of extra things that could be added to that as well. So, any other ideas on scorekeeping for Coach?
A couple of observations. I'm brand new to that coaching app,
Yep.
just because we have some changes in our ministry
Sure.
happening. In the quizzer section where it lists all the kids and you can move them, what you can't do is remove them if they've quizzed out
Yeah.
and leave
correct.
a blank spot.
Yep. Yep.
And so also if you have kids quiz out, whether they're quizzing out or erroring out,
Yep.
you can't move them
Yep.
out of that lineup in any way.
Yeah, you're right. It's a little trickier the way the iPad works. Something that it's definitely something that's on my mind.
Yeah,
to
I mean,
take
just
care
even
of.
if there were blank spots.
Yeah,
that you
which
could
is what
choose to
obviously
move them
would,
to.
yeah. That's obviously what I would end up doing.
Yeah.
The trickier part is moving them out. Because of the way that works, it's the tap thing. There's nothing else to move them
Right.
to. But there are
Maybe
definitely
you could
some
make
things.
some
there.
blanks.
Yep,
So
yep.
you tap and the
Yep.
blank goes in. It could be,
Yeah.
be just a different color. I
Definitely,
don't know,
definitely some
something.
possibilities there. Definitely some things to think about. Again, it was a lot of those things are written in scenarios where it's like, yeah, I don't really care that much as a coach. I can see they're not there, but I understand exactly what you're talking about, and I've had a lot of people ask that one, so it's
Yeah.
definitely something we'll look into. Yep. Sorry, did you have
Oh,
more?
I
to say?
had one more
Yeah,
observation.
go ahead. Sorry.
When you're pulling up the references
Mhm.
and you're getting all the quote and the possible questions, some of the verses I was noticing today, because I was just shadowing our team, quotes were coming up, but not always questions.
The only reason that should happen is if there actually aren't any questions in that verse. If there are,
Okay.
and there are a few verses where that's not the case. Not a lot. Probably a little more this year than some other years, just because of the material. That may not be true.
Because we did have an
Yeah.
instance where it was a question
There
and
actually
all I
was.
saw was a quote.
Yeah, there's two things that happen there. One, when you loaded the questions, something may have gotten fluky and it just didn't get them. The other thing is sometimes when you go get it, it fails. A lot of those flakinesses, so to speak, are fixed in the new version already. the only reason you don't have a new version today is because I haven't coached in a while and I haven't gotten all the bugs out of it. So I'm hoping to get there, but it's just gonna take a little time. So
When I was coaching with a team, and I did a number of years, but I used to like to change color in the half. Is that a possibility, or
Yeah,
the
so-
halftime score, so you could sort of keep track,
so
or even the overtime?
on the computer that actually already exists to some degree, although it's pretty close to the same color, so it's kind of hard to see. I've tried to play with that in a way to make it a little bit more noticeable, but not obnoxious. What I probably will be most likely to do is kind of leave it like that, but give options for you to go change it if you wanted to some other color. On the iPad, it doesn't have the tally, so it doesn't really make sense as much there. However, I think the new version of it does have the detail as you tap to kind of edit a score, so to speak, as opposed to just add to them. I think it does break down in the per period, so you can see first half, second half, overtime, much like you can on these ones.
I haven't seen the app, so I.
Yep. Any other thoughts on?
The Android app that one of our guys used,
Mhm.
Bible quiz timer by Gus Marshall.
Okay.
That doesn't seem pretty good. That's 20, 30 seconds.
Yep. Yeah, and again, I think there's probably some other ones out there too. So definitely, I think that's from that perspective. And again, I'll hit that again at the end, but we need to get that information out. We need to, if somebody creates an app, let's let everybody know that somebody created an app and have a way for other people to be able to test it and play around with it and use it. So, all right, next one is quizzers. So, from a quizzing perspective, back when I was quizzing, we didn't even get to see the questions until right up close to nationals. We were allowed to see them. We had books. Didn't have the nice spiral ones we have today. We had what were called portions created by NIV. Some years, actually, when it was like Romans, we actually had a Romans through Revelations thing, and it was like just a little miniature New Testament that didn't have the Gospels in it. That's what it was. Today, obviously, they've got the quiz books that are designed specifically for us. Those are fantastic. The questions, they get the questions in all kinds of forms. They get them online through things like Perfect Quiz Out, where they've got the ability to create cards. They've got some cool things there from a practicing perspective. Many of the quizzers use the Epic Battle app that I created. That's not my name, by the way. I don't know any idea why it was called that, but that's what the quizzers wanted to call it, so that's what it got named. And Epic Battle is just kind of almost like a flashcard, so you can go and select which material you want to ask questions over, and it pops it up and keeps track of how long it took and whatever. So things that I see there, obviously in something like Epic Battle is keeping track of whether or not you got it right or wrong. It doesn't do that today. But also one of the things that I'd like to see, and it kind of goes a little bit, one thing that I also didn't mention that I'd like to see on the scorekeeping is knowing, in the integration, is knowing what verse and question it was, so that I can store that with the quiz as well, because then as a quizzer, at the end of the day, or at the end of the year, or nearing the end of the year, I can go back and look statistically, what areas am I weak on? The only way you have that is if you have that data. You can theorize over what you think you don't know as well, and you may have a fairly good idea if it's really obvious, right? It takes me 20 minutes to quote through these 10 verses, and it takes me 20 seconds to quote through these 10 verses. That's a pretty big indicator that you know this one better than that one. But sometimes you think you know something really well, and in a quiz situation you don't. And the only way to really know that is to have some more statistics to kind of give you that. So I'd like to have the ability to get quizzers some more data. That's probably the biggest thing for me on the quizzer side. And I mentioned a little bit of the Alexa and that kind of stuff. I think the ability to kind of practice at home and have an individual pad that you plugged into a computer and just practice against with the computer. So, other ideas for quizzers from a technology perspective? I know that one's a little bit harder because most of us aren't quizzers. As a matter of fact, how many of you here have quizzed at some point in time? So a handful, but most of us not. So that one's a little bit more challenging. And I would recommend talk to your quizzers. What are the things that are interesting to them? What things would get them engaged? The thing about quizzing from a quizzer perspective that we really need to think about is not even just what will help them be better at quizzers, but what will get them interested in it, right? What will engage them? Because if it's just something that's just, it's another app and I don't care, right? I don't want to do quizzing. That sounds like too much work. I got to memorize what? How many verses? You've got to be kidding me. No way, I'm not doing it. We need to come up with ideas that engage quizzers. And so I think that's an area that we need a lot of work on. All right, audience, last category. So back when I was quizzing, the only way you saw a quiz was to be there. Right? The only way you knew what was going on in the quiz was to be there. There wasn't texting. There wasn't texting. Maybe if somebody was on the phone, you could talk them through it, but that was about it. We did have some quizzes on TV back in Kansas City, but they were very delayed, like, weeks delayed. So, stuff like that. But from a visibility perspective, you had to be there, right? That was the only way you knew what was going on. Obviously today we've got a number of things. We've got the live stats on the websites. We'll hopefully be doing, I think Andrew's working on some, they've done some Facebook Live stuff, and hopefully we'll have some streaming tomorrow. I don't know how much, but obviously that's a big one, right? Being able to stay at home, to be at home, and to be able to watch quizzing. It's not as great as being here, right? But not everybody has the opportunity to be here. So having the ability to get that from an audience perspective, to be able to see it from home is huge. Future for me, it's really just more of doing what we're already doing, but doing it more. More streaming, more online stats, and when I say more online stats, I mean collectively, using some kind of software in our local groups so that our stats can be online for everyone. So it's not just at nationals, it's not just at regionals, but we're always doing it so that people can do it frequently. And then more information on those. I added a few things this year to just kind of give a view of quizzing that we haven't had before, kind of a play-by-play. I don't know, again, how many of you guys have kind of gone and looked at the website, but the kind of play-by-play, it shows you, hey, this is how the quiz progressed. If you're watching it live, it kind of, the newest things on top, and so you kind of see what just happened. That's just one more piece of information. Again, I talked about the time integration. That's a piece of information that's not there today from an audience perspective, from a remote audience perspective especially. Information that the audience needs. You mentioned having the question up there when you're displaying. Obviously, we can't have the question in a place where the quizzers can see it, even remotely, right? But one of the things as an audience that makes quizzing so difficult is they're talking so fast, you can't understand them, right? But when you have that in front of you, even when they're talking super fast and you can barely understand them, having that text in front of you is the difference between completely not understanding them and having an opportunity to understand them. And so having a way to get that information out to the audience somehow, whether it's live, whether it's remote, somehow getting that out is game changer from what the audience is seeing from a participation perspective. Having the scores up there is helpful. We've been doing that for years, even back in the days when Orland was doing it on a overhead projector and getting it wrong all the time. But I mean, all the time. Don't tell him I said that. Or TikTok. It's fine. Either way. But so yeah, from an audience perspective, I think it's really just kind of engaging in the quizzing to me. That's the big thing for me, and it's providing a little bit of interest. When you're new to it, you're trying to get people interested. It's really hard to understand why it's interesting, and it's really hard to understand it when you can't understand it. So more information is good. Any ideas on the audience? All right, so kind of the wrap-up thing, and I've touched several times on this that I talked about at the end. We need help, right? I can't do this all. I got a full-time job. I got family, I spend probably more time sometimes on this than I should. We need to get other people involved. We've had a few people here and there that do it. I'm more than willing to take whatever code I've written and make it available to other people to help get things going in different ways. I'm more than willing to help kind of get other people going. But if you've got, whether they're quizzers, whether they're parents, some people around your organization that do software at any level, get them involved. It's an opportunity. It's something that really, and again, we need it. Especially when you think of the quizzers. The quizzers are not going to be interested if we throw the technology to the side, because technology is engaging right now, and if without it, young people just don't engage in anything. Yeah.
Your contact information?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I work for Faith Life, and I kind of know a few
Yeah.
developers, and
Yeah.
some
So
of them happen to be former quizzers.
that's fantastic. I would say go to my website, the ProQuizzer.com website. You can certainly, there's an email and phone number stuff on there. That's the best place to just kind of start. Email, honestly, if you call me, I'm probably not going to answer the phone if I don't know who it is. And you can leave a message and I'll get back with you. But email's by far the best way to kind of start the conversation with me. The nice thing about email for me is I can be doing something and I can come back to it later and hit it whenever I can. So email is certainly the best way to do that. But yeah, if you know some people, absolutely. We've had a few people in the past that have expressed interest and not done it. I really want to get more people involved in it. The more, the better. The more things, new ideas, and the more people are doing it, the more new ideas we have. So, any other things on that regard? Ideas?
Is there, like I got my iPad for Mother's Day, but how often do you have to update? Because I got a new laptop and we tried downloading all that stuff on my new laptop and it just took forever. I mean,
Downloading
does it have to be refreshed or?
the iPad or the scorekeeping apps. I'm not really sure.
I had a scorekeeping app and the thing started crashing, and so I got a different computer, but now that one works really slow. I don't know why it's brand new.
What scorekeeping app are you talking about?
Your scorekeeping,
This one or the iPad one?
the one that has the SK.
But on the iPad or on the computer?
iPad it was on the laptop.
Okay. It doesn't need very much, honestly. It's pretty lightweight. It uses it's called .NET Core Frameworks or .NET Framework stuff. That's honestly most often installed on most computers already. Might be a new version of it that requires to install it, but it's pretty standard stuff. Not real big. The files themselves, the updates are tiny. They're really, whenever you connect online and it goes and checks out and it says, hey, there's a new version, you click update, that file is really small, like super small. So if you're having problems, it's probably something else on your computer that's causing it, to be honest with you. Being on the internet and
I'd stay away from a Chromebook though.
yeah, Chromebook
Stay
won't
away
work
from
out.
Chromebook.
Yeah, Chromebook actually won't work. It does require Windows, so it won't run on a Chromebook at all right now. Yeah, I mean, smart screen. So, if you got a lot of money to give up, so yeah, what he's asking about is what he's asking about is a lot of times you'll see when you launch the program, it's like, hey, this program doesn't look safe. You sure you want to run it? And you got to go jump through some hoops. The reason for that is because Microsoft requires a signing certificate to validate that you are who you say you are when you install that software, and those are not cheap. I have those on my website, and actually those are you can get for free now, but the application ones are several $100s a year. So. Could we do it? Yeah. Do you want to? I'm not putting the money up for it right now. So. All right. Well, thanks to everybody for coming. Thanks for your ideas and input. Obviously, like I said, if you've got some stuff, hit me on the website. Shoot me an email if you've got other ideas or if you've got people that think might be willing to help. I'd love to hear from you.